In a quiet town outside Dallas, Texas, an ordinary mechanic and a young woman whose life was forever changed by tragedy cross paths in the most unexpected way. What begins as a simple repair of a broken wheelchair unfolds into a powerful journey of healing, resilience, and second chances. Through Jake Collins, a 36-year-old mechanic haunted by the memory of his late sister, and Emily Hayes, a 29-year-old woman battling the weight of limitations and society's indifference. This story explores how kindness can rebuild not just machines, but lives. A tale of perseverance, loss, and the courage to move forward. It reminds us that sometimes the people we meet by chance are the ones who restore our faith in ourselves and in each other. Jake Collins wiped the grease from his hands with a rag as the last sliver of sunlight dipped behind the horizon. His small workshop, tucked off a two-lane road outside Dallas, smelled of oil, rust, and a faint trace of coffee that had been sitting on the counter since morning. Business was slow most days. Old trucks with failing transmissions, bikes with sputtering engines, the occasional neighbor who couldn't afford a dealer repair. Jake didn't mind. The quiet gave him time to think, though sometimes the silence carried memories he tried hard to bury. The bell above the workshop door jingled, soft but sharp against the stillness. Jake glanced up from his bench. Rolling slowly inside was a woman in a battered wheelchair. The wheels squeaked every half-turn, the brakes squealed when she stopped, and the upholstery sagged in defeat. She looked about his age, but carried a weariness in her eyes that made her seem older. She hesitated before speaking, biting her lip as though ashamed to ask. Jake put down his wrench and stepped closer, his expression gentle. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice low, almost apologetic. "My name's Emily. I know you fix cars and bikes, but I was hoping maybe you could take a look at this." She patted the arm of her chair, which rattled slightly from the touch. "It's falling apart, and I can't afford a new one." Her words carried the sting of embarrassment, the kind that came from having to depend on the kindness of strangers. Jake felt his chest tighten. He crouched to meet her eyes. "Don't worry about that," he said with a small smile. "Machines are machines. Wheels, brakes, bolts. It's all the same language. Leave it with me, and I'll fix it like brand new." Emily blinked, surprised at the kindness. Most people either looked at her with pity or avoided her altogether. Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, almost comforting, as though she wasn't a burden but just another customer. That small difference meant everything. She nodded slowly and backed out of the chair so Jake could examine it more closely. The moment his hands touched the wheels, Jake felt a pang of memory. His late sister, Lily, had relied on a wheelchair for most of her short life. He remembered the sound of her laughter echoing through their childhood home, the way she used to race down the hall despite their mother's protests. Fixing her chair had been one of his earliest repairs, long before he ever learned to tune an engine. That memory tugged at him now, bittersweet and heavy. This wasn't just a job. It was personal, almost like stepping back in time. Emily stood awkwardly nearby, shifting her weight as though ready to retreat. "If it's too much trouble, I can take it somewhere else," she said softly, though the words carried no conviction. She knew very well she didn't have many options. Jake looked up at her, wiping his hands again.
"Trouble?"
"Not at all. Besides, I could use the company." He gave her a reassuring nod. Something in his tone made her shoulders relax ever so slightly, though she still avoided his eyes, as though afraid to reveal just how much she needed this kindness. Jake rolled the chair onto a raised platform he usually used for motorcycles. He tested the brakes, barely functioning. The bearings in the wheels were shot, and the frame squeaked with every movement. It was a wonder Emily had managed to use it this long without an accident. He muttered under his breath, "Whoever gave up on this thing should be ashamed." Then louder, he said, "I'll need a little time, but I can fix it up." Emily nodded, relief flickering in her eyes. She looked around the shop. Old posters of classic cars, scattered tools, the smell of oil. It felt alive. As Jake worked, he noticed Emily watching him closely, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as though holding herself together. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Why are you helping me?" The question carried more weight than she probably intended, but Jake understood. People rarely offered kindness without expecting something in return. He paused, meeting her gaze. "Because I can," he said simply. "And because you remind me of someone I used to know." He didn't elaborate, but Emily caught the softness in his voice and didn't press further. She just nodded as though she understood. The hours passed quietly, the hum of Jake's tools filling the room. Emily eventually sat on a wooden stool by the wall, watching him with cautious curiosity. He worked with precision, tightening bolts, adjusting brakes, replacing worn bearings with spares from his bins. Every move carried a rhythm, like a craftsman who knew his trade inside and out. She found herself oddly comforted by the sound of tools clinking, the steady patience in his hands. It was different from hospitals and clinics, where she usually felt like an inconvenience. Here she felt seen. That was something rare. Jake glanced up occasionally, catching the way Emily's eyes followed his every move. He wondered what her story was, why someone so young seemed weighed down by the world. But he didn't ask. Instead, he let the silence build a bridge between them. Sometimes words weren't needed. When the final bolt clicked into place, he gave the wheel a spin. Smooth, no wobble, no squeak. He pressed the brakes and the chair held firm. For the first time in years, the old chair felt sturdy again. Jake exhaled, almost as though releasing a memory with it. "All done," he said finally, stepping back. Emily approached slowly, as though afraid to hope. She eased into the chair, testing the wheels. Her eyes widened as it rolled smoothly, silently across the floor. She pulled the brakes and they held strong. A laugh, light and disbelieving, escaped her lips. "It feels new," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Jake smiled, though inside his chest ached with the memory of Lily. Seeing Emily's joy felt like a gift, as though he'd fixed more than just a chair. Maybe in some way he had fixed a piece of himself too. Emily looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she said softly, the words trembling on her lips. "You don't know what this means to me." Jake shook his head, brushing it off. "No thanks needed. Just promise me you'll take care of it, and yourself." For a moment their eyes held, and Jake saw not just gratitude, but resilience. Emily had been fighting her battles quietly, and tonight she had finally found someone willing to stand beside her, if only for a little while. That connection, however brief, carried a weight neither of them would forget. The night air had turned colder when Emily finally wheeled herself toward the door. She paused before leaving, her hand resting lightly on the frame. "Most people, they just see me as broken," she said quietly. "But you didn't. You just saw the chair." Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight. "No, Emily, I saw you." For a second, she didn't move, just let the words sink into the spaces where loneliness had lived too long. Then she gave him a small, grateful smile before disappearing into the dark Texas evening, her chair rolling smoothly on the pavement outside. Jake stood in the doorway long after she was gone, staring out at the empty road. The night was quiet again, but different now, touched by something unexpected. He thought of Lily, her laughter, her courage, her absence. Maybe helping Emily had been fate's way of reminding him that not all endings had to be filled with loss. Sometimes you got a second chance to honor the ones you loved. He turned back into the shop, the chair's echo still lingering in his mind, and for the first time in years, Jake felt a quiet sense of peace. The next morning, Jake returned to his workshop earlier than usual. He had hardly slept the night before, Emily's grateful smile replaying in his mind again and again. Something about her had struck a chord deep inside him, a mix of compassion and memory that wouldn't let go. He found himself inspecting the chair again, even though he had already fixed it the night before. Tightening bolts, oiling hinges, polishing the frame, he wanted it perfect. Not for the job's sake, but for her. For once, the silence of the shop felt less heavy, more purposeful. Later that afternoon, the bell above the door jingled again. Emily wheeled inside, this time with more confidence. The squeaks were gone, and her movement was smooth, fluid. Jake looked up from his bench and couldn't help but smile. "Well, looks like she's running smooth," he said, motioning toward the chair. Emily grinned shyly. "Better than smooth. I almost forgot what it felt like to move without fighting it every inch. She paused before adding, I wanted to say thank you again. I owe you more than I can ever pay. Jake shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Emily lingered by the workbench, her fingers trailing across the worn surface as if searching for courage to say more. I haven't really told anyone, but I've been saving for a new chair for years. Every time I get close, something happens. Rent goes up, medical bills pile in, or life just gets in the way. Her voice trembled slightly. I felt stuck, like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move forward. Jake listened quietly, wiping his hands on a rag. Sometimes life doesn't wait for savings, he said softly. Sometimes it sends people to remind you that you don't have to carry it all alone. There was something in his tone that made Emily look at him differently. She noticed the tired lines in his face, the scars on his hands, the quiet weight in his eyes. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a man who carried his own history of loss. Your sister, she said carefully, piecing it together. The one you mentioned? She was in a chair too, wasn't she? Jake froze for a moment, then nodded. Lily, she was younger than me, stubborn as hell. Doctors said she'd never live past 20, but she made it to 22. Strongest person I ever knew. His voice softened. Losing her left a hole I never really patched up. Emily lowered her gaze, her hand resting on the wheel of her chair. I'm sorry, she whispered. Jake shook his head, brushing it off, though the ache lingered. You don't need to be. Life has its ways of teaching us what really matters. Maybe fixing your chair was my way of keeping her memory alive. Emily felt a lump in her throat. Few people spoke with such raw honesty, especially to someone they'd just met. She realized then that Jake's kindness wasn't just about fixing things. It was about healing pieces of himself he thought were lost forever. As the days passed, Emily found reasons to stop by the workshop. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes just conversation. Jake never asked why she came. He simply welcomed her presence. The quiet shop, once filled only with the hum of machines, now echoed with laughter and small stories about life. Emily told him about the books she loved, the dreams she once had of traveling before her accident. Jake shared tales of his younger days, racing bikes on dusty back roads, and how those wild years had grounded him into the steady man he was now. Slowly, walls began to crumble between them. One rainy evening, Emily arrived soaked from the storm, her chair glistening with droplets. Jake rushed to grab towels, helping her dry off. You shouldn't be out in this weather, he scolded gently, concern etched across his face. Emily laughed, brushing her damp hair from her eyes. What, and miss our talks? Not a chance. She said it lightly, but the truth was deeper. His workshop had become a place of refuge for her, a corner of the world where she wasn't defined by her wheelchair, but by her presence. Jake felt it too. Her visits had turned the silence into something living again. That night, as thunder rolled outside, Emily opened up about her accident. I was 19. Car crash. Driver ran a red light. Her voice trembled. Doctors said I was lucky to be alive, but at the time it didn't feel like luck. She paused, staring at her hands. For years I hated myself, hated this chair. I felt like I was trapped in someone else's body. Jake leaned against the counter, listening intently. And now? He asked softly. Emily smiled faintly. Now I'm starting to think. Maybe the chair isn't what defines me. Maybe the people I meet along the way matter more. Jake's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to tell her how much she already mattered to him, how her presence had filled an emptiness he didn't know how to fix. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just nodded, letting the silence carry what he couldn't yet say. Emily seemed to understand. She gave him a look, gentle, steady, knowing, that said she felt the same. In that storm-lit workshop, two lives scarred by loss quietly found the beginnings of something fragile yet profound. Like a seed planted in unexpected soil, as weeks turned into months, Emily's chair became a symbol of their growing bond. Jake upgraded it little by little. New cushions, stronger wheels, polished armrests. Each improvement was more than mechanical. It was a promise, silent but clear. Emily noticed every detail, her heart warming with each small act. "You're spoiling me," she teased once, running her hands over the new handles. Jake chuckled. "Just making sure you get the ride you deserve." But deep down it was more. For Jake, every bolt tightened was a vow not to fail her the way he once felt he failed Lily. One Saturday morning, Jake found himself at a local scrapyard, searching for parts. He spotted an abandoned wheelchair frame, lightweight, modern, but damaged. An idea sparked in his mind. Over the following weeks, he worked late into the night, piecing it together, welding, painting, customizing it to fit Emily perfectly. It wasn't just a repair. It was a gift, a symbol of everything he couldn't put into words. By the time he finished, it gleamed like new, stronger and more beautiful than anything she could have dreamed of. For Jake, it was the closest thing to giving her wings. When Emily arrived and saw it, she froze, her eyes widening. "Jake, is this for me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Jake nodded, nervous for the first time in years. "Consider it an upgrade." "No charge." Emily wheeled closer, her hands trembling as she touched the sleek frame. Tears welled in her eyes. No one's ever done something like this for me." Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight. "You deserve more than patched-up scraps, Emily. You deserve something that carries you forward, not holds you back." She looked at him then, her tears turning into a radiant, grateful smile as she tested the chair. Rolling effortlessly around the workshop, Emily's laughter filled the air. Jake stood there, watching her move freely, and for the first time in years, he felt Lily's presence not as a shadow, but as a light. He could almost hear his sister's voice teasing him, telling him he'd finally done something right. Emily circled back and stopped in front of him, her eyes glistening. "Jake, you didn't just give me a chair. You gave me freedom." He smiled softly, though his eyes burned with emotion. "And maybe you gave me the same thing," he admitted quietly. That night, after Emily left, Jake sat alone in the workshop, staring at the empty space she had filled with laughter and warmth. He realized that somewhere along the way, this wasn't just about fixing a chair anymore. It was about fixing himself, piece by piece, through the kindness he gave and the connection they shared. He didn't know where their story was heading, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone anymore. And for a man who had lived too long with silence, that realization was worth more than all the riches in the world.
Weeks turned into months, and life outside Jake's workshop carried on as usual. Dusty roads, small-town chatter, neighbors passing by without much change. But inside those workshop walls, something different was growing. Emily came almost every day, sometimes with fresh coffee, sometimes just with a smile, and Jake realized that his once empty evenings were now filled with stories, laughter, and the comfort of another soul who understood struggle. He didn't dare call it love yet, but something in the way his chest lightened when she was near told him he was walking closer to it than he had in years. Emily's new wheelchair became more than transportation. It became a statement of who she was and who she could still become. She moved more freely, more confidently, no longer held back by creaking wheels or failing brakes. One afternoon, she rolled into the workshop clutching a flyer in her hand. "Jake, you'll never believe this," she said breathlessly. "There's a community marathon in Dallas. They have a division for wheelchair racers." Her eyes sparkled with excitement and nerves. "I've never done anything like this before, but I want to try." Jake looked at her, stunned but proud. "Then we'll make sure you're ready." From that day forward, the workshop transformed into a training ground. Jake modified the chair, further lighter wheels, smoother bearings, streamlined adjustments. Emily trained outside in the open lots, pushing herself further each day while Jake cheered from the sidelines, stopwatch in hand. There were moments she faltered, muscles trembling, breath ragged, doubt clawing at her resolve. But every time she slowed, Jake reminded her gently, "You've already come further than you thought possible. Keep going." Slowly, Emily's strength grew, her speed increased, and the determination in her eyes replaced the shadows of self-doubt she had carried for so long. But not all days were victories. One evening, after a particularly grueling practice, Emily broke down. She stopped halfway down the stretch, tears streaming down her face as she gasped for breath. "I can't do it, Jake," she sobbed. "I'm not like everyone else. I'll never be fast enough, strong enough." Her words dissolved into the night air. Jake rushed to her side, kneeling beside the chair. His hands gripped hers firmly. "Emily, listen to me. You've already survived things most people couldn't even imagine. Strength isn't about being the fastest, it's about showing up when the world expects you to quit, and you're stronger than anyone I know. Those words stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after the tears dried. They became her anchor on the hardest days, the reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. As the marathon drew closer, Jake surprised her with a new set of wheels, custom racing ones, sleek and durable. "Thought you might need an edge," he said with a grin, though his heart raced nervously at her reaction. Emily ran her fingers over the metal, tears brimming again. "Jake, I don't deserve this." He shook his head firmly. "You don't deserve less. Never again." Her gratitude spilled into a smile that made Jake feel both vulnerable and alive. The morning of the marathon arrived, crisp and bright, the city buzzing with energy. Crowds gathered along the streets, music blared, and racers lined up at the start. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she positioned herself, gripping the wheels tightly. She glanced to the side and saw Jake in the crowd, his hands cupped around his mouth as he shouted, "You've got this, Emily." That simple reassurance steadied her nerves. When the whistle blew, she surged forward, the world blurring into motion. Every push was a battle against her doubts. Every turn, a fight to prove that she belonged here as much as anyone else. Halfway through, exhaustion burned in her arms, sweat stung her eyes, and for a terrifying moment, she thought about quitting. But then she heard Jake's voice in her head, reminding her of her strength, of Lily, of the countless hours spent preparing for this moment. She gritted her teeth, pushing harder, faster. The final stretch roared with the cheers of the crowd as Emily crossed the finish line, not first, but not last either. The placement didn't matter. What mattered was that she finished. She had conquered something greater than the race itself. She had conquered the part of her that once believed she couldn't. Jake rushed to her side, his face beaming with pride. "You did it," he exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. Emily, panting and trembling, looked up at him with tears streaking her cheeks. "We did it," she corrected softly. "I couldn't have done this without you." Jake knelt down, resting his forehead against hers for just a moment. The world around them blurred away, leaving only the two of them in that raw, unshakable moment of victory. For Jake, it wasn't just Emily's triumph, it was his too. For once, he felt like he hadn't failed someone he loved. He had lifted her instead. In the days that followed, Emily's story spread throughout the small town. People who once ignored her began stopping to congratulate her, inspired by her determination. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as a burden, but as a fighter. A woman who had faced the weight of the world and still pushed forward. Jake, meanwhile, found his workshop busier than ever. Locals bringing him work, not just for his skill, but for the respect they now carried for the man who had stood by Emily's side. The quiet mechanic and the determined young woman had unknowingly changed the heart of their community. But beyond the praise and recognition, what mattered most was the bond between them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold, Emily wheeled up to the workshop with a smile. "Jake," she said softly, "I've been thinking, maybe it's not just about what you fixed. Maybe it's about what we fixed together." Jake looked at her, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. "And what's that?" he asked. Emily's eyes met his steadily. "The broken pieces of ourselves." In that moment, Jake realized that what had begun with a squeaky chair had grown into something far deeper, something that neither of them could deny. Their story wasn't about mechanics or marathons anymore. It was about healing, about finding strength in places both of them thought were gone forever. Emily had rediscovered her courage, her voice, her freedom. Jake had rediscovered his heart, long buried under grief. Together, they had rebuilt not just a chair, but a life worth living. And as they sat side by side outside the workshop that night, the stars glimmering above, both of them knew this was only the beginning of a journey they would walk or wheel, for in each other, they had found not just hope, but home.